Greetings, ladies and gentlemen of YouTube. I'm Cipher, and this is the Devil's Advocate Debate Club. Today I'd like to talk to you a little bit about white privilege, and not just because it's trending on Twitter, though I'll admit it might have something to do with the timing, but this is a video I'd wanted to do for quite a while now. White privilege is an absolutely fascinating subject to me because when I grew up, white privilege would mean having systemic benefits within the, legal system or government generally that benefited one because they were white. These have mainly been wiped out before my lifetime. But in recent years, people have decided that white privilege is still a thing here in America. Now, there are plenty of places around the world where things are more racially segregated. I will be focusing on an American viewpoint today. In the sense of white privilege, people now tend to mean that, well, it's something much more complicated. That white people, because of years of oppression of minorities, have a head start in life. See, the idea goes that because white people benefited from slaves and had money from the slave culture coming in, that there is still a monetary benefit to being white today, despite the fact that not all families benefited from the slave culture, and that this completely seems to ignore the plight of the Irish. They also talk about social engineering when it has to do with how we view people, and as black being seen as bad and white being seen as good in media and such. But I've always seen that to have more to do with the light and darkness. People tend to be afraid of the dark and to naturally seek the light. That's people of all colors. It has nothing to do with race or skin color. And so when it comes to what white privilege is in society today, it can be very hard to define. But the closest I've come to is a monetary benefit that, while not every white family has, on the whole, white people have over minorities due to, I would say, the sins of the father or of our ancestors, but essentially oppression in the past that the current generation has had little to no hand in. What this means is that while people will say there is white privilege, they will still accept that things like affirmative action programs and hiring policies based around race, ethnic quotas, things like this, are essentially making it to where right now white people, and especially white men, are more at the bottom of the social totem pole when it comes to, I'm not going to say social oppression, because I know they say that white people can't be oppressed, but social benefits, let's say. Now, the argument that white privilege is still about then goes to say that, oh yes, well, now they have equal benefits and have for some time, but how long before that did white people have all of the privileges and, basically take all of the money for themselves? It's easy for the 1% to stay the 1% if they're careful with their money, and in America, a large majority of that 1% is in fact white. Some of which is because of this culture's history of oppression, as many people see it. Well, let's assume for a second that they're right, and that the white privilege that they see exists today. That while even though white people have less advantages when it comes to getting a job or going to college or certain other social benefits, they're still oppressed because of the years of past oppression. So my question then goes out to all of you: how long would you like to see white people as a more subjugative class to the minorities until things are equaled out? White people are the majority in America, so I don't think it's unfair that they hold the majority of the wealth. If it were spread equally among the people, that's how things would be. So, do we do this by years? If we're saying that things have been essentially equal legally or have started leaning in the other direction with affirmative action programs since sometime in the 70s or 80s, are we going to say that that's 40 years towards retribution? And does this date all the way back to the 300 some odd years before that? Do white people have 200 plus years of oppression? And more than that, if the pendulum is swinging the other way, increasing oppression in order to even out the books of the racial scales? How is that fair to the people alive today who had nothing to do with the oppression of the past? How is that fair to a white boy born 100 years from now or 60 years from now who, if things were to continue to pendulum, not that I think they will, he would find himself in something like the Jim Crow days, but on the receiving end of the stick? Well, yes, I can see, where some people are happy to see things go the other way, where I do understand that, white people had it so good for so long, why shouldn't we have it better than them for a while? Or why shouldn't they have it better than them for a while? Because actually, most of these activists that are arguing for minority rights are white. But really, how long until the ledger is clear? What would you like in order to make things equal? Because I personally want to just treat people as equals, as individuals. I would like to live in a system where people are equal. Personally, I think legally we are very close, and that things like affirmative action are the last few things remaining in the way of racial equality. But lots of people will argue, and have argued with me at length on Twitter, especially, but other places as well, that the ledgers are not clear, that the racial oppression of the past is still affecting people, that even though the wealth of humanity today is way beyond anything we've had at any point in the past, that we live in the easiest, safest, most abundant times to live in, and that 40 years of having a legal leg up in those events should have definitely helped a lot. But okay, it was 300 plus years where you're claiming oppression. If that's the case, what would you like before we can come back to being equals? Go ahead and let me know in the comments below. If you feel that people are oppressed, what you think it would take to even the books. Because right now, it just seems like there are people who are pushing for more and more. Evergreen College had the No Whites Day on their campus. We're seeing the startup of more and more frequent whites-only newsrooms or media events. Excuse me, not whites only, blacks only, or whites not allowed. Both. It gets confusing because, to me, from the background I grew up with, all of this just sounds like racism. To me, it sounds like we're going against Martin Luther King's idea of treating people based on the content of their character, not the color of their skin. And I know that a lot of people are going to be angry and say that I don't understand oppression. Fine. If you understand it better than me, tell me what it will take to make things right so we can start treating each other equally again. I would really like to know if anyone has an answer, or if the white activists just want to give the minorities as much as possible out of a sense of what I would have once called white guilt, but after a study from, I believe, Yale or Harvard, after a college study I read recently on the concept of the soft bigotry of low expectations, I've really started to wonder at the true internal motivations of these white activists who don't seem to see an end in sight for oppressing their own race. Now, just before filming this, it's actually a bit late.